Ah, well, Lisa, Allgood, welcome. We are delighted
Thank
to have you back
you.
with us.
Always happy to be here.
So, what's the latest on COVID and vaccines?
Well, what's the latest on COVID? So, the sixth vaccine booster is out, fifth booster, sixth shot. There are three to choose from. You still have Moderna and Pfizer, and now there's the Novavax one. The Novavax vaccine is a protein-based vaccine. The other two are still the same mRNA platform, but they're all targeted to a different variant of COVID. So, COVID is still around. Um, COVID is doing what viruses do, it's mutating rapidly. The new mutations that are out are heavily mutated. It's JN1 and HL1. They're highly infectious, so you get sick really fast. But again, as viruses do, they don't cause as much disease. So the same typical symptoms that you saw before, these ones tend to start, as I've seen, with sore throat, and then a cough, and then progress to what looks like a cold or an upper respiratory kinds of disease. Less prevalent than the original is the loss of taste and smell. So you sort of can't use that as a guide anymore. It's something that has been part of the mutation. It's not ever going to go away. World Health and CDC have both declared it to be an endemic virus. It's going to continue to mutate. Viruses almost never mutate into anything that is more disease causing. They just don't want to kill off the host. So as much as you can, get a vaccine. Which one you get, they're pretty much three flavors of the same thing. The only difference is if you've had an allergic reaction to a protein-based vaccine in the past, then you don't want to take the Novavax one. You want to take one of the others. But that's something that you should talk to your physician about. I mean, other than that, where you are, the incidence is not really high. It's between 5 and 9%, depending on what part of New York you're in. And the really hot spots right now tend to be the smack dab center of the country. It's Nebraska and Iowa and that area. The states that surround it are a little bit higher than you are, but you're actually in pretty good shape. Vermont and New Hampshire, though, are going up. So depending on where you're planning on traveling for Christmas, do be careful. But that's pretty much it. I mean, like I said, you're 5 to 9% incidence. Hospitalizations are up slightly. Right now, between RSV and the flu, which is also a little bit on the rampage, it's a little hard to tell if the incidence is a true incidence for hospitalization, because there's a lot of flu hospitalizations as well. There's a lot of pneumonia out there, which is unrelated to COVID. So, it's sort of the perfect storm of the winter viral season hitting. But I will remind you that when cold comes and you put the heat on, it dries out the air, which means that particles from a sneeze or a cough or even speaking travel further. And so if anybody is susceptible, if you have a congregation that's susceptible, then you want to just maybe watch the distance a little bit and or look at masking again. And I think that at this point is really an individual choice. For Paxlovid works best when you take it within a day or two of being diagnosed. And so depending on how long she's had it, Paxlovid actually may not work for her. It may just be symptomatic. It really depends on whether or not she's got underlying conditions that make her more susceptible to complications. But again, that's in concert with doctor.
Victor, you work at a nursing home. What are you seeing in the nursing home?
We've had we had one spike. I'm going to say about that ended about a month ago, um, uh, and it was simply that the hospitals had stopped testing when they discharged. So our policy was still to test, and someone was tested late in the day of their arrival, and it spread like wildfire. And we were masking. I mask all the time anyway. I'm kind of the odd duck around here wearing a mask, but I'm traveling from building to building and room to room, and I don't want any hitchhikers.
Yeah, smart.
Um, uh, but generally we're doing pretty well. The observation also was that it's certainly far diluted from what it first was. That employees got sick, residents got sick, and have recovered. So
I think, Victor, since you work in a nursing home, then you will maybe see this too, but there is some data that says even, and this is true for all viruses, it's not just COVID, but the older we are, the more susceptible we are, even if there aren't serious underlying medical conditions. So just like those of us who are over 65 have to get the pneumonia vaccine, the prevalence of COVID infections, at least those that are being reported, and part of this may be because they're in an assisted living facility or a nursing home. If you're over 70, the incidence is much higher than if you're over 60, and it goes down from there. So that may mirror what you're seeing as well.
yeah. Right now we're past it, thank goodness, but we are seeing isolated cases here and there.
Yeah,
is kind of what we deal with.
I think estimates are saying, and these are estimates, and they have to take them that way. But between, we've now been 3.5 years into COVID exposure with all of the vaccines that have been available, even for those who don't like vaccinations. Probably 90 to 98% of the population has been exposed to COVID in one way, shape, or form, either through vaccination or through infection. And so, that's that sort of population infection or vaccination rate that makes transmission a lot harder. So even when you do get an infection, you generally don't get the kinds of symptoms that we see, not only because the disease or the virus itself doesn't cause as much disease, but because we've got some immunity from some kind of level. And the vaccines have shown to have long-lasting effect. Again, all three.
Yeah, and do we have any sense of their lasting of immunity? I mean, I guess the strongest immunity they have is within 3 to 6 months, right? And then the longer you go out, the less immunity you might have from that vaccine, or how does that work?
It sort of goes in a couple of different directions. So as the virus mutates, the previous vaccines that were targeted for a different variant of COVID won't be quite as effective. But the whole idea behind immunity is that you've got 2 levels of immunity. So you've got the immediate response of antibodies that are circulating, but you've also got cellular memory immunity too, which takes a little bit longer to kick in. So for the more recent vaccines that are better targeted toward the variants that are currently circulating, it's just going to take a day or two for those cells to remember, I've seen that virus before, start making antibodies. And so it takes a day or two for the antibodies to kick back in. But the immunity is pretty long lasting. It's God's amazing design that you've got a built-in redundancy.
Neat.
Yeah, Paul.
Would you remind me of your background, your education, how you came to this?
How I came to be presbyter, the accidental presbyter.
No,
I'm an
how you came
immunologist
to
by
be
training. Yeah, I spent
a
36
knowledgeable
years in the
expert
pharmaceutical
in
industry.
immunology and such.
Yes. Yeah. And the last position I held was with a small contract research organization that specialized in the mRNA platform.
Okay.
And so not necessarily for a vaccine, but the platform in general. And so, yeah, that was before God decided to either use his sense of humor or his sense of timing. I don't know which it was, but.
And your educational background?
I graduated from the University of Medicine and Dentistry, New Jersey back in 1985.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I'm not a pastor. I'm a commissioned ruling elder, but I'm not a pastor.
So I have told my children and my grandchildren to learn as much as they can from this COVID outbreak, because they can expect this kind of thing to happen about 3 times a century. Does that sound about right to you?
Or faster than that, yes. It's interesting. My daughter is a psychologist, and she said she's doing work primarily with young adults and adolescents right now. Not her favorite client base, but she said the social implications of what is collective trauma globally, because nobody of our generations, any generation, has been through this before. The things that we've learned about, and I'm not going to get political, but about communication, about medical health on a national level, let alone a global level, the interface between the pharmaceutical industry, which normally keeps things very, very confidential for patent reasons, and didn't this time. As soon as COVID was known, the mRNA platform for a vaccine has been out there for 25, almost 30 years now. They've tried it with other viruses. It just never was effective. It was always safe. So they've tried it with Zika, with Marburg, with Ebola, with HIV, and they couldn't get it to work. This is the first time they've gotten an effective vaccine off the mRNA platform. And what was beautiful about this is sort of the collision of worlds in terms of where technology has moved. So the first recorded incidence of COVID in the United States was December 19th, 2019. By January 10th, 2020, we had decoded the entire nucleic acid for COVID. We knew exactly what it was and exactly what to target and exactly what to put onto that mRNA platform to get to that very first vaccine. That's why we had a vaccine 9 months later, because usually that takes years. And so, that was part of the distrust of the vaccine at the beginning. So we had people in place in our government who wanted to control the narrative in a way that basically did not allow the medical community to control the narrative. That was a loss, because that really created a lot of confusion. And that was global. That wasn't just our government. So that's one thing I think we've learned. How we solve it, don't know. But CDC, which is considered a global leader for epidemiology, was not allowed to say its piece. I think that's one thing we've learned. I think the other thing we've learned is how quickly the scientific community can work together when there is open source communication. So nothing about the development of this vaccine was hidden, not between Moderna and Pfizer. They targeted slightly different parts of the protein, but they each shared data all the way along, and the epidemiologic community shared data as soon as it got it. So it was all out there, and I can still go on the CDC websites and see some of what was shared. That was very different and necessary. There is a virus that is now being seen in China again, that is not responding to treatment in many, many ways, and they're not sure what it is. So I think 3 times a century might be more. With the ease of travel that we have as a human tribe at this point, I know I was in October, I was in 6 countries in Central Asia. Not around a lot of people, because there aren't a lot of people there, but I travel all the time. And so it's very easy to have these things spread. There's an outbreak of a disease right now in the Congo. Again, that tends to be a hot spot for these kinds of things. So I think we watch. I think we try to fund our epidemiologic and global health communities as best we can. And I think we learn to trust them. I think that's what we need to do. I think we also need to find out what are the right forms of communication in terms of where you learn about the veracity of the scientific data that's being put out there. So instead of relying on Facebook or those institutions that have a political bent one way or the other, go to source data. Go to the knowledgeable people and trust that data.
That's easy enough for me. But for a lot of people out there, that's a problem. I noticed that all the good information was on Facebook as well as the bad information. I noticed that all the good information was scattered all over the social media sources as well as the bad information. Trying to figure out how to help people differentiate is much more difficult.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think you don't go to Facebook, you go to the source documents as best you can. And it's tough. I will say that even my parents are in their late 80s. They live in the northern part of New Jersey. Their primary doctor said, after they told him and actually showed him one of the videos from a Facebook thing like this, he said, I'm not getting that information. that your daughter's giving out. He said, I don't know where to go get it either. And that was part of the chaos of how it was handled at the very beginning.
That's why we started these calls in the first place, because we didn't know who to trust for all of this.
Well, I appreciate that you might trust me. I mean, I look at all of the sources I have. And I will admit I'm biased. I spent my time in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm always going to go to the data and say, if the data that I see and I interpret, because I spent most of my career in clinical testing and working with FDA, if I can see the data and I look at those safety data and I say, yes, I would take it and give it to my grandmother, that's the best I can do.
Okay, but I mean, as a pastor or a former pastor, I'm interested in the educational problem. I mean, the scientific problem, I trust scientists. I trust them explicitly. I didn't major in math for nothing. But when you say go to the original sources, that's peer-reviewed journal articles.
Yep.
Even I cannot read a peer-reviewed journal article in your field and get more than 10% of what's in it. So what's needed somehow is people who become trusted, who are capable of filling that in-between spot between the peer-reviewed journal articles and the, you know, scientific lay people who need to know something, but know enough to know that they can't figure it out themselves.
And that's why I said we cut CDC off at the knees inappropriately. Normally, somebody like CDC, it could be Francis Collins from NIH, it could be Tony Fauci, who's a brilliant guy, but who was muzzled and whose narrative was controlled. That shouldn't happen, because that's where those kinds of things happen. That's where that translation should happen. But I can tell you that even the doctors who do have access to peer-reviewed journals, and you can get on the Journal of the American Medical Association website or the Journal of International Epidemiology website and read the articles. If you read this is what most scientists do to start. Read the abstract, read the conclusion. You can get most of it. You don't have to see the data.
Okay.
We have a couple of people that are here, but mute and video off. So Michelle, Scott, do you have any questions, comments?
I do have a question, and it might be quite silly. I don't know.
No such thing.
About a month ago, I went to the pharmacy and I got a COVID shot in one arm and flu shot in the other. And I was dead to the world for the rest of the week. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I shouldn't have gotten them together. It's something, there's something swirling around my body now. Like, is that a real thing? Did I just make that up in my head?
So I actually got 3 shots all at once: COVID, RSV, and the flu. And I don't generally get a response to a vaccine. I don't have side effects. And actually, a couple of days ago, I got Prevnar, which is the pneumococcal one, and I've still got a weird soft spot over there. What it means is your body said, hey, we need to react to this, and your immune system is working. So there's no reason why you can't get all of those shots together. But sometimes you get chills and you get fever and you feel yucky for a couple of days. It's because your immune system's working.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So bravo, Michelle.
Yay, my immune system.
Yeah. That's right.
Right.
Yeah, I've had people who, very much pro, vaccines, things like smallpox, polio, everything else that we thought everyone knew in their lifetimes, saved everyone. But there have been people who have gotten very bad reactions, and even the rebound effect of getting the vaccine. I had COVID. I got vaccinated in all the boosters, but I got COVID a year ago in the summer, and then I got it again this August, just before I was going to get that booster. And then my doctor frankly advised not to get the booster for a while because I just had COVID, and that there had been some, I'll say bounce back effects kind of a thing, rebound effects with it.
Right.
And can you talk a little bit about that? In one sense, it's like, well, that's part of the process. On the other, for those who are already skeptical about vaccines and all that, it's the outlier that proves the point for them. And it can explain how that all works, and then B, how to deal with that.
So that's a lot of questions all rolled into one. How do you deal
That's
with
why I was on mute.
You were thinking about it all. How do you deal with the vaccine naysayers? I don't know that you can, to be honest, because some of that is political, and some of that is listening to those Facebook sources that are promulgating things that are not, I won't even say not true, but certainly not proven. I actually, good friend of mine passed away from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis not too long ago, and I made the offhand comment that this is the fourth person that I know that's been diagnosed. One of them was 9 years ago, and ALS is a very unknown disease. And the comment came back, "Oh, my doctor says that's the vaccine." I'm like, "Oh, please." Nobody knows how ALS starts, when it starts, how long it takes for symptoms to develop. It's very easy to take association and make it into causality, where it's inappropriate to do so. And there's all kinds of anecdotal data out there. I think when people ask me what I think about the vaccine, my comeback is exactly what I just said. I've known about this mRNA platform, and I've seen data on multiple iterations of potential vaccines and clinical trials, and it's safe. And so, is COVID a nasty virus? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's wonky. And I've said this all along, it's the weirdest virus I've ever seen. The long COVID symptoms that come from it are unparalleled. There are long symptoms from flu and other respiratory viruses too, but not like this. And it's largely because it causes so much inflammation in the body. And sometimes it causes hyperinflammation. It's the inflammation that causes the problem. So is it better to be vaccinated and protected than not? Yes. If you can't get vaccinated because you've got some underlying medical condition, we've talked about this before. If you've got cancer or an autoimmune disease, the vaccine isn't going to work as well. No vaccine is going to work as well. It's not just this one. Flu vaccine doesn't work as well. Typhoid vaccine doesn't work as well. So you consult first with your physician, talk about the potential for a side effect, and then make a decision. Are there incidences where there are cardiac complications? Yes. Is there underlying disease or other mitigating factors there that are likely to have been a causal effect? Mostly. You're really chasing ghosts at this point. So it's not an easy answer. All I can say is the data that I have seen, and we now have 2 solid years of data on this version of the vaccine, it's as safe as anything else we've got out there as a vaccination.
Yeah, no, I'm all on that, and I did read a bunch of history on the mRNA and the whole development. Very fascinating. Of 30 years in the making, so to speak. But relative to this bounce back, because I have had more than one person. Can you explain that bounce back or whatever it's called, rebound or whatever it's called?
Yeah, and I think I don't know that that's completely understood either, but I also think it's partly because your body is still dealing with the after effects of the infection itself. And because COVID causes so much inflammation and affects so many different organ systems, one of the other reasons COVID is a very strange disease. I mean, it can cause diabetes, so it gets into your pancreas. It can cause GI problems. It gets into your gut. It can cause kidney problems, gets into your kidney. Obviously, it may not cross the blood-brain barrier. I don't know that they've seen evidence of that, but the inflammation it causes in the vascular system is almost unparalleled in a vaccine, and that goes everywhere. So it's, let your body calm down before you challenge it again with the vaccine, because that vaccine is going to cause an immune response, and that's the bounce back. Does that make sense?
Yes. And you mentioned earlier, this is why Larry shouldn't have had me on mute, is mRNA. When I read about and the whole history behind it, it just seemed like this is like, phenomenal. Like we should be able to crank out all these vaccines now and, quickly and be able to respond to them and all that. But I didn't realize till you mentioned it that, and not that it was a panacea, but like this mechanism does not work for all kinds. So is it really primarily for, I'll say, respiratory type ones, if you will, rhino type viruses that it seems to be best suited for, as opposed to like, typhoid or mumps or rubella or anything else like that?
Well, the typhoid, rubella, those vaccines are already in place. There's no reason to upgrade those to mRNA. I think the ones that, the viruses that mutate quickly and have never been able to have a cure for them are more hemorrhagic ones. So Zika, Marburg, Ebola, HIV, of course, is an autoimmune. So it creates its own havoc in the system, in that a vaccine is automatically not particularly good for something like HIV. As they've tested each one of those viruses with an mRNA platform, the mRNA is really just a vehicle. It doesn't give it any additional efficacy. You have to have the right piece of protein from the virus that you're going to be creating a vaccine from, that the body will recognize, that then will produce an antibody and an immune response that will actually address the virus. I can tell you that for, I think it's HIV. Now I don't remember. Yes, HIV. Back in Procter and Gamble days, I got the privilege of working with Bob Johansen at Institute for the Future, which is a very forward-thinking think tank in California. One of the women who was working for him at the time was a woman named Jane McGonigal. Jane was instrumental in saying that gamers thought differently and approached problems so differently that if corporations were smart, they would be putting gaming in as an entry criteria, as an interview criteria. And so she created a challenge in concert with the pharmaceutical industry. They got 30 gamers in a room, and after HIV's been around since the late 70s, we've never been able to figure out what the right configuration of the receptor is for HIV. So how does it attach to a cell? In 4 days, the gamers did that. So now we have a new way of doing it. So, so the way that this was put together originally, we probably didn't have the right protein either. Is it going to work in the future? Not a guarantee. Particularly not for HIV. So that's a tough one. But again, HIV has had so many pharmaceutical advances made in terms of the treatment and the prolongation and the remediation of symptoms. Is a vaccine even necessary? Don't know.
Lisa, we can't thank you enough. This is incredibly valuable information, and you are incredibly generous with your time. So
I'm happy to do it at any time. And if anybody's got a question after this, please just get to me. I'll see if I don't know the answer, I'll go find it. So you guys be blessed. Have a Merry Christmas and stay safe.
Same to you, friends.
Take care.
Same to you.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.